The slave trade costed millions of Africans their lives. Many died before the transport and in the middle of the voyage towards the New World in America. The colonizers didn't see black slaves as humans but as a currency and treated them like animals. With the disillusioned minds, they chained black people together on their ships and put all of them under the deck when they wanted to sleep, so crowded you couldn't breathe due to the smell of sweat and couldn't make a single movement because it was so crowded, leading to multiple deaths caused by illnesses and getting choked in the crowded sleeping room. This is known as the Genocide of African Slaves. The slave trade with African people started in the 1400s when the Portuguese people brought slaves with them home from the expeditions along the West African coast, but back then it was relatively few slaves which were brought along. It was first with the colonization of America the slave trade had its breakthrough, when Spaniards and Portuguese people used black slaves to produce sugar and wine on their islands, and when France and England joined the trading with black slaves it peaked, leading to the profitable triangular trade, where the Europeans sailed from their homelands to the African west coast, loaded with mainly guns and ammunition, ready for trading with the native African chiefs, who gave them African slaves in return. From here the slaves were brought along on the most horrifying travel in their life, on overcrowded ships towards America. If they survived, they were met by European slave owners ready to buy them and use them for production of cotton, tobacco, sugar and rum. These goods were brought back to Europe with enormous profit, but the slaves remained on the fields until their deaths. Slaves were now trapped on a new continent and being sold like cattle. The slave owners inspected them before purchase, their muscles, age, height and much more, and black people unwillingly stood there being treated as an economic unit instead of a human being. When they were sold, the slave owner brought them home to his field, and here they were unwillingly forced to work for their new owner. In the last part of August, the high season for cotton arrived. Black people had a sack bound around their shoulders and neck, and a basket in their hands which could carry 2 bellows of cotton. On a regular day, a slave should be able to collect 200 pounds of cotton. If not, they were punished. The working day started as soon as the sun rised, and apart from the 10 minutes break where they had the opportunity to swallow what the slave owners called food, they worked until darkness arrives. When it's full moon, they work until midnight. They dare not to stop before the owner allows them to rest or eat. On a rich slave farm, there were living up to 1,000 slaves. They were spread out on the fields and led by inspectors equipped with a club and a whip in case the slaves did not obey. The inspectors were advised and controlled by the administrator sitting on the main plantation. The slaves were collecting their monthly food ration from the main plantation, and once every year they could collect new clothes from the entire family, approximately worth $7. The slaves didn't receive beds either. They were forced to sleep on the floor on a thin carpet. But the slaves didn't see that as a big problem, because they never had time to sleep. When the darkness arrived and their working day was coming to an end, they had to go home and make food and repair their clothes before the next day, which took hours, only giving them a few hours sleep before the inspectors blew their horns early in the morning. And if you didn't hear the blow in the morning, hours of torture and punishment was waiting you. At last, after 300 years of slavery of African people, European people started criticizing and complaining about the slavery. South America, who was dependent on the slavery, was not amused by the rising opposition. Without the hard work from the slaves in their cotton fields, their economy would collapse. But yet the trading with slaves was forbidden in England in 1807, in France in 1818. The United States of America had already joined the ban of slave trade in 1808, but here the slave trade continued. Slave trade was not forbidden in Brazil and Cuba, and hereby the United States of America could trade with the countries in Latin America. All this posture culminated in what we know as the American Civil War, where the President, Abraham Lincoln, and the Northern states triumphed and forbid the slave trade completely in the Southern states in 1865. In 1870, the last reports about slave trade ships was received. How many slaves were transported across the Atlantic under the period of slave trade between 1500 and circa 1870 is not known. but estimated between 9 to 12 million black people, and to this number it's probably needed to add millions who were casualties on the horrifying ships. Around 1850, Brazil was populated with 50% of slaves, and today it's expected that the entire population of Brazil is descendants of the slaves.